Hey, it's Travis. Too many camp directors run just on gut feel. Our free Resilient Camp Blueprint Diagnostic is your dashboard for resilience. Take it today at camp.mba/Travis. Again, that's camp.mba/Travis.
Hi, and welcome to The Pudding.
The sweet proof of research to back up what you know about summer camp.
My name's Dr. Mandi Baker. My pronouns are she and her.
And I am Travis Allison. My pronouns are he and him. And today on The Pudding, we are going to talk about the words camp magic. And Mandi and I have very different experiences with the words camp magic. But I want to start with Mandi's because I think it aligns with probably how most of you listening think of the word camp magic. And Mandi and I'll talk about my experiences with the word after. So Mandi, what do we know from the research?
Sure. Well, when I was asking people about their camp experiences, one of the words that kind of kept coming up to the surface, if you'll bear with the metaphor, was the bubble. Camp was talked about as being a bubble. And if you can imagine, I have this image in my head like Disney and Cinderella's washing the floor and she's singing along and all those bubbles floating up and they're kind of iridescent and they're floaty. And you can imagine with that music, there's sort of this idealization of what camp's all about. Now, the people in my research talked about bubbles and the camp bubble, particularly in lots of different ways. There were good things as well as not so great things when they talk about that bubble. But it got me thinking about magic and what is that magic that we put into camps to create an environment that feels like a bubble.
Right. Right. And honestly, I mean, the bubble itself is changing because when Beth and I were directing, certainly when I was a seasonal staff member, like you wouldn't even get the news. If like a supplier would come in and drop some stuff off and say, "Oh, did you hear about this big thing?" And you're like, nope.
No idea. Yeah. And that's one of the great things about the bubble is the boundary lines of it actually keeps things out as much as it keeps certain things in, the news being one of them. I remember being actually at YMCA Pinecrest. It was the summer I was working there, and it was the summer of the great Eastern Seaboard blackouts.
Yes, I was going to mention that too.
Yeah. Totally. Okay. And our fridges stopped working. And then you have the camp food panic because that's a lot of food to go bad. That's a lot of food. And we had no idea why. Of course, we assumed it was local, maybe the Muskokas, maybe a power line went down somewhere on a highway, right? Like these are the kinds of things you assume. But we're just totally oblivious that this fairly significant event was happening across North America. That's what the bubble is good for. And bad for, but good for as well. Yeah, totally.
And I had been that exact same thing. We lost our phone systems because they were all powered phone systems. So we found, a powered jack and plugged in an old fashioned phone, which was part of our emergency procedures. And I spent 2 hours trying to call Ontario Hydro to report the outage because we were panicking too. Same thing. It's like, we got a lot of kids here. We got a lot of food. We got to do all these things. And it happened on a Friday night. So we were like, we have to be able to make this site ready for tomorrow when parents come and all those things. And I just happened to get bored of dialing Ontario Hydro over and over again and just called a buddy of mine just because I was bored of that thing. And he's like, no, everybody, like nobody has power. I was like, okay, that changes so many things.
Yeah, doesn't it? It changes our strategy. I'm going to stop calling Ontario Hydro. I don't think they're available right now. Yeah. That's kind of the magic of camp. And those are some of the things that I explored. The other motivation to dig into this particular piece of research about camp bubbles and camp magic, I was at an Australian Camp Association conference, and I'm up on stage on a panel as these things happen in my world. And Australians have a funny sense of humor, and winding other people up is part of that sense of humor. So a mate that I know said in front of the entire room, "What camp is better, Canadian camps or Australian camps?" I was like, seriously, you're going to do this to me? How do I answer this? And how do I answer this, honestly, but at the same time, without putting myself in a position that'll never work again?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So actually, the answer came to me fairly quickly and easily. Thank goodness I got out of that jam in an honest way. I truly think that the Australian way of managing staff and the professionalism of outdoor recreation education employees is a whole new level there, and a really good one. I think there's a lot that we can learn in North America of how Australians do that professional management employment stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But camps in Australia don't have what I called magic. And I started being able to explain some of the big concepts behind camp magic. So I'm going to jump in there, Travis. Stop me if there's anything you need me to unpack.
Can we both make our note in front of everybody to come back to how the bubble has become more porous? I know that's not the purpose, but I think that that's something interesting for those who are starting as camp leaders professionally year-round now. Your bubble is much different than the bubble that Mandi and I grew up with, or that, when we worked. So,
and that raises some fascinating debates, some really cool debates about, how much do we let people contact in and out of the bubble wall? And does it pop the bubble? Does it detract from? In some instances, does it reinforce? So there's some really fascinating conversation. Okay. Yeah.
So you start with yes.
So I'll talk to you guys about the concept of the theories behind what makes bubbles. Right. So when I started pulling it apart, ultimately this bubble thing was about a social environment that is reinforced by the physical environment, that gives the social community a sense of being unique, set apart from the everydayness of everything else, and also possibly isolated from everyday life. And this can be a very special, very powerful experience. So there's some old researchers way back. There's Victor Turner and who's our other one? I want to say it's Durkheim, who writes about collective effervescence. Isn't that great? Do you hear it?
Especially when we're talking about bubbles.
Love the bubbling. But when you get like good people together and you're having a good time and the whole thing feels like it's bubbling along all by itself, that's what he was writing about. Now, Victor Turner wrote a little bit more about he was talking about rites of passage and spaces of betwixt and between, which are wonderful words, betwixt and between, that suspended space between two established and respected, and in his case was identities or states of being. For Victor, he was writing about from childhood to adulthood, and he was talking about that space in between adolescence. We know it as adolescence. When he was writing, adolescence wasn't kind of a thing by itself. It was starting to just be established as a thing and a whole world of professionals around it. And he particularly was looking at some of the rites of passages of youth in African countries and African tribal life. And the youth would be sent out into the wilderness, into remote nature, and they would have to work together to survive. And when they had proven that they could do that, then the community would accept them and deem them adults, and therefore with the privileges and responsibilities of adulthood in that community. So when compared, camp held up against that kind of space, a lot of things are very similar. Mm-hmm. And here's the one really resonating piece. It's a term he called communitas. And communitas, that's spelled with an AS on the end, is this very unusual, very intense, very intimate community that becomes formed inside these suspended reality spaces. And he made the argument that there were certain characteristics. Everybody had to be focused on the same goal, that the markers of identity and status that existed outside of that moment were irrelevant and were shed, like throwing off a heavy coat. You throw off those coats and you take up the identities and the status based on your function in achieving that singular goal. Now, that's what's cool about camp. There is a singular goal, or a fairly focused goal. I mean, we all have our different objectives, but there's a fairly focused goal on having a good time, everybody being included. Like, the goals of camp are quite amazing and fairly simplified. And by consequence, your identity in camp is about how do you bring that goal about? A space where people have fun and are included. And so people's identities, they get to pick up different identities. They can try them on like dress up clothes, and they can throw off some of the stuff that doesn't work for them. And it's why there's this space for, you often hear about the camp story where the shy kid got to be outgoing or got to be a big leader, a big upfront, loud kind of leader. Yeah, is that your thing?
That was totally my experience. Yep.
And so one of the things that makes that so exceptional is that there was nobody standing around telling your new community who you should be. You get to narrate your own identity. So the cool thing is that you can try on whichever ones you want to try on. And because one of the singular goals of camp is for it to be a safe, positive space.
Yeah.
You actually can try stuff on with very little social consequence. And this was something that would fall apart in Australia because most camp in Australia is school camp. So all of the relationships that you hold in the classroom comes with you. The way the teachers pigeonholed you, good, bad, or otherwise, comes with you. And the outdoor leaders in the Australian system have a very hard time, if not an impossible task, of breaking down and discarding it. Sure. It's just, it's the outside world comes into the outdoor space. There's no new social environment invented. Right. You were going to say something. Sorry. I saw that.
Well, what I was going to say is one of the great privileges of being a year-round camp leader for a long time is watching kids become young teens and then become teenagers and watching them trying stuff on. And it's just such an awesome privilege to see it. Like, all right, this year we're punk. Like, bring it on. I want to see it.
Yeah.
And I think them campers or young staff showing up at camp with a new camp persona. The first kind of day is they've got a lot of walls up about that. It's like, no, this is me now. And if camp's like, yeah, great, then it all sort of breaks down, and it's not as much of a front that they're putting up. You start to see them pulling together all the real pieces of what they are to become. And man, what a great thing to watch happening. What an awesome part of this life.
Can I say this? It's a privilege, but it takes special people like you to make that space an option. If you as a leader, camp director, or the organizer, or the institution that's, backing the camp, enforced a certain expectation of that young person to stay rigid over the changing seasons and years that you see them, you haven't actually caught the spirit, or in this case, my argument, the magic of camp. And so it's lovely to hear you say that, Travis, but I hope you hear the compliment I'm trying to pay you is that you watch people come in and let them try it on and change it and chop it and change and you made that space a possibility for them to do that. And that doesn't happen everywhere. It's actually quite unusual. It feels magical because it's so unlike all these other things of life. And I think that's where I start to pull at the idea of the word magic. It's the spirit of camp where we will hold space for you to define yourself in relation to the goal of the group. So it's not a free for all. We know when people show up and they're not committed to the goal of camp, the culture really jars. It's very, very difficult. But we will let you define you however you want to bring it for this suspended reality, as long as it pitches into the goal of what we're trying to achieve here.
Right. Yeah, I keep interrupting you because you see so many things that touch me in so many ways, touch my love of camp and what camp has meant to me. Where do you want to go next?
Well, I think it's important to talk about what the ingredients are for communitas to happen. I think it's important to recognize, we call it the materiality of our experiences. So material things. So when we in my kind of research, we talk about something called discourse. And most people, I think, have a sense of what that is. Philosophically, for my dude, so the kind of philosophy I use, discourse is the stories that are told, but it encaptures more than simply storytelling or stories that have words. We are sent messages often through actions, but also through artifacts, through things, through material things that are in our world. So just this last week, I was talking to my students. I'm back in the classroom at university, And we were talking about people who use the cash registers with people and people who use the blipping machines.
Yes.
And we had a cash register staff employee, and she got very, very heated in a wonderful, passionate way about how she wants people to come to her, and sometimes takes it a bit personally when people go to the blipping machine. So we unpacked for the blippers in the room why they use the blipping machines. And then I started talking about the materiality of it. When there's only one human doing cash out and there's 8 empty machines, just the way the machines are set up and the fact that they're more available will cause people to choose to go to the blipping machine because they don't want to queue up. Because time in our society right now, time is incredibly precious. So we're very concerned with efficiency. I think most of us can account for our lives in 5-minute increments. Whereas if you talk to my parents' generations, they can account for their lives in like a couple hour increments. Like it's a different sense of time, a different reality of time. So when we talk about camps and materiality, let's recognize first that they're often away from city centers. Certainly sleepaway camps or overnight camps are away from city centers. They tend to be a bit more rural. They tend to be within natural landscapes. They tend to give the illusion, if it's not actually true, that they're more isolated. They're harder to get to. The driveway is long and bumpy and not smooth. You can in my head, I'm like, how would they ever plow this if we did winter camp? Like, how would we ever get in and out if there was winter camp here? So what we're doing is we're telling people a story with the material things that they are in fact leaving their everyday lives. I mean, some of those are the most obvious when we leave our everyday relationships. So when we leave our children, leave their families, and we see that homesickness. Now, homesickness is arguably a culture shock. That's what that is. It's I'm missing my culture, my family culture, my subgroup, my tribal culture, is the way sociologists might call it. So there's a number of material things that also add to the going away into nature, going, far, an hour drive, 3-hour drive to camp. All of this stuff tells a story. It tells a discourse of you are in a separate time and space. Then when you get there, and there's all of these very different social rules, like you can shout at dinner. Like, what? You'd never be allowed to do that, get away with that nonsense at home, or singing and shouting at dinner. When you paint, keep inside the lines, don't get it on your clothes. Camp's like, we're going to paint on ourselves. The social rules are so wildly different.
Yeah.
And when camps do it well, those social rules are assumed. They're rarely spoken and explained. They're just simply absorbed. And they're absorbed well. And they're absorbed well because largely they give individuals a sense of well-being and a sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. I'm important. I matter. I am part of this space.
Yeah. So I get what it is. Well, I guess first question is, what do we know about how important that is, or how that's a positive of the camp experience? And then what do we have to be intentional about?
Let's talk about the good, and then let's talk about what sometimes I call the dangerous. Okay. Sure. So it's not, and dangerous, I don't mean like life-taking risk, but there's always this possibility for anything to be good or bad. It's really about how we use it and what our motivations or intentions are behind the thing. So in terms of some of the things to think about, I remember being called in consulting with a homeless shelter. And their interest was, how do we make this supported living environment a place where people feel dignified and a place where people feel a sense of community? That often, this was the Salvation Army in Brisbane in Australia. They recognize that often supported living is like, here, if I give you 4 walls, you're gonna feel good and you're gonna be able to sort out your life. And often people who are homeless or live with homelessness, it's not that simple. They can't just, 4 walls aren't going to sort out the problems that have led to a situation where they are regularly homeless. So the people there really wanted to look at, how do we help make this environment socially as well as physically, structurally? How do we make this environment where we can provide them realistic support and realistic objectives, and help them get out of the cycle of homelessness? And that's when I pulled on my camp liminality communitas research. And I said, okay, some of the things we need to do is start helping individuals here have a sense of purpose, have a sense of building their own identity, making it safe for trying out different identities. Particularly, we were talking about employment identities at that point, because employment is a huge part of breaking the cycle of homelessness. Mm-hmm. And we were also getting to a point where we were talking about building community. This building didn't have community spaces.
Oh, yeah.
This building, no, they were just single rooms. There was no kitchen where they, like I call my kitchen headquarters. Like all of the world's problems come and get dealt with through the kitchen, partly because of necessity. We're prepping food, we're making, we're caring for each other. And because our bodies are in the same space, we're sharing our problems and sorting out what's going on. And so there can be camps, I think, take for granted. There's a lot of assumed, like, oh, this is how we've always done it. And it's, well, actually, did you realize that whether you did it on purpose or not, you're adding to that sense of the kind of social environment you choose to have, the values you're basing that environment on. So when we always did it this way, we talk about challenging the status quo. We've talked about it a lot between us on personal times, but it's just as important to understand that you've always done it that way because it has a really good purpose. And therefore, you want to be able to maintain it. You want to be able to hold it. You need to keep it relevant to the changing societal expectations. But we've always done it this way. It also helps to know why when it's good as much as when it's not.
Yep.
And camps have this incredible, we're, I guess, blessed to be able to take it for granted, but camps have created a social environment of inclusion that is powerful, but often done on take it for granted assumptions. So what I was trying to get at is there are a lot of things that you can do quite intentionally to enhance this. Here's the dangerous edge. We are now playing with how cults function.
Right.
I remember when my supervisor said to me, I think you should read literature on cults. And I got really, really defensive, which should have been a sign.
Yeah.
No, camps are like, but actually what we've done when we isolate people from their usual everyday relationships, we do it mentally, emotionally, right? When you and I were on staff, we didn't make phone calls. Maybe once a week, we got to use the one phone for all the staff, right? Like we were emotionally and psychologically disconnected from our usual relationships. We were disconnected from the news of the world. We were physically isolated. Like, you hearing it? It's starting to sound a bit dodgy. So we need to be very careful because what we've done is created our own social environment in a vacuum. And whenever there's a vacuum, there's the potential for an abuse of power or abuses of power. Yep. So that's the dangerous edge of the liminality, the communitas, or the magic of the bubble, is that abuses of power can take place, and we have normalized this weird little utopian world so much that people don't recognize the abuses of power. And they may even exercise power in an inappropriate way and not recognize it in themselves. Keep in mind also, a lot of people who work in camp are young, and so they don't have a lot of experience and benchmarks to bounce things off of too. So it's easy to kind of lose track. The other, I think, danger of the bubble is that it has an overarching promise that everybody will feel like they belong all the time. And so when you don't feel like you belong, it's actually more of a discrepancy. You feel it bigger. You feel more of an outside, and you don't have your usual psychological supports like relationships or whatever your recreation can be. I know my daughter will climb into a book when she needs a little reprieve from the world. And then, she doesn't have her books.
Right.
It's camp.
Yeah.
Now, I think camps are getting smarter and more savvy about this. And you did raise the question of, like, is the bubble more porous? And the answer is absolutely. Yes, some do. Some are still very intentional about keeping those boundary lines tight. But there's these dangerous edges to being in a liminal space.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got about 10 more minutes. So I just want to think about, for you, Mandi, what are the most important things to make sure we cover in the time we have? What are the best takeaways, or the most, I asked before, like, what should we be intentional about, if that gives you a bit more direction to start?
Sure. Well, I will throw this out there. Most of my research has been about camp staff and a particular author writing about Communitas says, his name's Leifson, and he says, being in, an internist said this too, being in an environment like this can do, for extended periods of time, can do damage to the heart, mind, and soul. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I was doing a PhD looking at the emotional labor and burnout of staff. So when I read that, I was like, okay, time to pay attention. There's an intensity to the relationships in a community, a communitas. And it's extremely intimate. It's really intimate. Like, you become friends super fast and you tell them stuff you wouldn't tell anybody else. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of vulnerability. Again, vulnerability is its own vulnerability. So it's another possible danger, possible space where people can be hurt. But this idea of having staff stay in that space for extended period of times, they're not just staying in that space, they're delivering that space. And that's a weird kind of labor.
Sure.
Like, it's commodified. We're paying them or rewarding them for it. But it's a weird kind of emotional labor to maintain the bubble. And yet it's doing them damage at the same time because it's so intense, because it's so demanding, because it's so draining. It's like, whoa, we need to be careful. This is where, in practical terms, why it's so important to give staff a break from their employment. Hopefully during the summer, give them a week off, let them get home to their families. Why it's important to maintain good boundaries around the weekends so they can disconnect. Why it's important to let them hold on to the relationships that support them well. So whether that's they get on their phones for an hour or whatever each day, or however a camp organizes that. Now, to do that, though, in balancing without throwing off the bubble, without bursting the bubble, is also a really tricky balancing point. So I think what I'm saying in practical terms is that bubble is phenomenal for the campers, for young people who come in. It's super special. They don't get to try on so much dress up identity anywhere else in their life, and so safely. So keep doing that. Keep your dress up closets, keep them stocked, keep them full, in terms of allowing young people to try out lots of different kinds of identity, but be very wary of, one, the potential for growth of systems of abuse, not just one person abusing powers, but like whole little systems. So like hookup culture, or the reporting on hookup culture amongst employees, that kills the bubble pretty fast. So how do you manage and maintain that? Because everybody's going to gossip. That's part of community. You're not going to shut that down. And anyone who thinks they're going to shut it down, all you're doing is sending it up further underground. So don't fool yourself. Make it a healthy way for people to decompress and deal with, to have their rants and to deal with their feelings. But for staff, it's managing that and making sure that they actually get space out, that they don't lose reality, their own reality, that they don't break relationships with the important people in their lives because of being disconnected. That can happen too. Our relationships can deteriorate when we don't maintain them. Maintenance looks different for every relationship. So these are the kinds of things that if you're a director, you're providing camp, that you need to think carefully through. How do I create the space where my staff are able to be in their everyday lives, as well as step back into the space to keep them healthy and keep them connected? And especially in Australia, when staff are there year round.
Right.
Year-round staff deal with their boundaries between these worlds differently than seasonal staff. Seasonal staff tend to I'm all in and I'm all burnt out like by the end of the season. If they could keep some of the habits that year-round staff tend to hold, like regulating their hours, being able to step out on the regular, keeping relationships outside of camp, like maintaining them, not just abandoning them for the season, my gut tells me that they would stay mentally and therefore physically healthier for the season much better. Right. Does that help answer some of the questions?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I appreciate you pulling in different research to the different little slices of what this means, what the camp bubble means. So I want to talk about my thinking about The word camp magic.
Camp magic. Yeah,
so
talk to me.
my job is very different than your job. My job is to communicate the value of camp to people who don't understand camp. And so I ask people not to use the word camp magic because, and I always follow up with this, you and I know what camp magic means. We probably can't describe it to people who don't know it, but if I come up to another campy person and I say, it's one of those magic camp moments, then another camp person's like, I don't even need to know what the specifics are to know what you mean.
Yeah.
That I've lived enough of those moments that I know what that thing is. But it's so amorphous. It's so cult-like.
Yes.
It sounds like a cult as soon as you start. That it instantly turns people off. And so I always push people to describe camps in ways that don't use the words that will turn people off. When I think about, camp magic, one is that when you think about how magic is, the references to magic in current culture, to go to a magician is to enjoy being fooled. And so it's illusion. Instantly, you're in a relationship with something that is about being fooled. So it's it's not real, but or illusions. That it's they're doing something that you're not seeing that makes you believe things. So all of those things are why I am cautious about it. It feels like magic. It feels like lies. People who are incredibly passionate about camp, ourselves included, start talking about camp magic and they just go and they don't watch other people just go cloud right over and stop listening to you, which is, partly why camp people, especially when the bubble was stronger, it get to the middle of October and my high school friends would be like, I just need a couple weeks without camp stories. I'm happy to listen to your camp stories.
I'm in camp. Yeah, totally.
I just need a couple, I love listening to your camp stories, but I need a bit of a break. And you're like, yeah, okay, right. Yeah. Like I'm in it. So that's my concern. It's just the different ways that we, because of our jobs, it's just the different ways we have to think about camp. And so my concern is not that it exists. I love that it exists. I just know that we're not very good at telling the story of it.
Yeah, the language is problematic.
To people who haven't experienced it. This is one of the biggest things that I try to work with on camps is, back to research, is that camps cannot tell me with any clarity whether they are any good at reaching families that don't have some camp experience in their family history. They can't tell me that. And my suspicion is that we're great at telling people about camp who have some frame of reference, whether it's a bad frame of reference, just a cultural one like, Wet Hot American Summer or Meatballs. But there's a starting point there. But anybody who has nothing, no parents have been there, we're just not good because we tend to shortcut to camp magic. So I don't quibble with the research in any way. It's just that you and I have a different job to do.
And the language is. I think the language is problematic. I agree with you when you start breaking it down. Magic is arguably, even in the folklore, is reserved for specific people.
There you go.
And so it's kind of an exclusive thing. And magic is also sort of used, like myth as, well, I can't understand it, I can't explain it, so I'm just going to dismiss it under this heading of magic. So even if we look at, different definitions of magic, and I agree with you, there's a certain con artistry to the idea of, illusion and magic like that. But then even if we talk about myth, it's I can't understand it, I can't explain it. And the problem is whenever there's phenomenon that is not understood, it can't be explained, it becomes quite anxious. So somebody who doesn't understand, can't explain, it can become quite superstitious and anxiety inducing because, well, no, I can't wrap my head around it. So maybe what we can offer people with this idea of what is the magic of camp is what we're saying is we create a unique social environment in which young people have opportunity to experiment with identity in a safe and supported manner. That they get to even explore the ideas of community, somewhat idealistic notions of community, but isn't it a nice way to hopefully teach and model certain values of citizenship through this idealized community? even if this is the pilot project for life, we're helping them build a notion of what it means to participate in a community in a positive and meaningful way. That's what the magic is, when all of the ingredients come together, like the material aspects and the social aspects and the articulated and the not articulated. They all come together to support. Yes, it's ideal, but to support community and citizenry and identity that's positive and meaningful and supported and safe. That's pretty special. And I think that's what we mean when we say magic. We're saying, darn it, dang it all, that is special. And I don't quite know how to get my words on it.
Yeah. And I'm 100% convinced that camp people are wizards.
Well, there's that too.
Mandi, thank you for breaking this down. I'm so grateful to have this chance to talk to you about. I'm so grateful to talk about all the things you've learned about camp, and I appreciate you being so willing to share them. Is there a place that people can reach out to you if they have follow-up questions?
Absolutely. And I love the questions. I'm already getting some, and they just are so thrilling. So the best way to reach me is I have used to have a research consultancy called Lamped Research, and the email is getlamped, so GETLAMPED @gmail.com. Yes, that's like a light. If you're wondering how to spell it, I was really excited about theory. Now the email address sounds really nerdy, but the theory at the time was, how do we create our lives as beautifully as we would a house or a lamp? And I thought, that's what we need to do. We need to turn some lights on and be beautiful about how we build our lives. So get lamps. You can send your questions there. I'm always happy to connect, and actually send me the gnarly, tricky questions. They make me think more, and often I do more writing with those questions. The other way to kind of check out some of my work, not all of it is open access, but some of it is you can pop my name into a Google search or a Google Scholar search, and most of my publications are there. If you can't get past an access wall, let me know. I can hook you up.
Perfect. That's perfect. And that's a great final call to action. If you're listening to this or watching it on YouTube, then email us. My email, travis@cocamp.pro, or Mandi's email that she just gave you. And I would love for there to be some, scenario. How do you, just questions unanswered. It's a Ask Mandi Anything with Travis's input on the side. There used to be in sort of the summer camp director community in Ontario, it was kind of a common practice at conferences that one particular camp director would hold discussions called Prickly Pickles. And there was a Prickly Pickle discussion with a great, very well-respected camp director. And so maybe that's the thing that you and I can take on for the whole camp world, is if you've got Prickly Pickle questions, send them to us and we'll figure out how to get you some answers to those.
Yeah, no promises that we have them on our own. I know I'm speaking on behalf of Travis, but we know people that are like super smart and stuff, and we can ask them too.
Right on. That's great. In fact, here's my call to action. If you have a question, like how would you handle this kind of question, please send it as a voice recording. Say your name. You can't be from if you wish to, but we'd love to hear a voice. So we'll just edit that into the show so that people can hear from other camp pros about their questions and concerns.
Yeah, excellent.
Perfect. Mandi, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure. What we have next up on the bill is looking at the power of camp community. So it builds on the idea of communitas, but we're going to start talking about relationships of power in that space and go a little bit deeper into the risks and possible harms, as well as the incredible impact and power involved with being in relationship amongst camp folks.
Excellent. Well, Camp Mavericks, if you didn't know, now you know. Go Camp Pro, way beyond the basics. Hey, it's Travis. Camp directors often tell me they're just too tired to take on anything new. That's exactly why my free Resilient Camp Blueprint Diagnostic exists. It doesn't add work, it shows you progress. Quick, free, repeatable, you'll know if your systems are paying off without the guesswork. Try it today at camp.mba/Travis. That's camp.mba/Travis.